So in the last video, I told you something that I don't think I've ever said on this channel that directly before. I told you that I almost lost my marriage twice. And I told you one of the things that actually started changing me, it was actually reflection. And when I say reflection, I'm not just talking about thinking about my marriage. And I'm not talking about just feeling bad about my marriage and not just promising that I was going to do better, but actual reflection. Really slowing down and asking myself hard questions about how I was showing up as a husband. And after I posted that, I honestly knew what the next video needed to be. Because it's one thing for me to say reflection helped me become a better husband, but the real question is, what was I actually reflecting on? What was I actually asking myself? What were the questions that expose where I was selfish, where I was defensive, where I was passive, and where I was disconnected? And what actually helped me start changing? All right, so that's what this video is. I want to give you the 4 questions I started asking myself that genuinely helped me become a better husband. All right, they didn't help me become a perfect husband. They didn't help me become a finished husband, but they helped me become a better husband. And I want to say this up front. These aren't some magic questions. This isn't some 7-day save your marriage type of video. These are the questions that forced me to get honest. Honestly, the questions that made me stop measuring myself by my intentions. That's what these questions are. And they actually had me start looking at my marriage through my wife's experience. All right. So if you're a husband, or even if you're in a serious relationship, I really want you to stay with me through this one, because I think a lot of men, we're actually trying to love well, but we're never slowing down long enough to ask the real questions, or even the right questions. What's going on, YouTube family, and welcome back to the channel. So here's the thing. You already know the premises from the last video. Marriage, it runs on what your spouse is actually experiencing, not your intentions, okay? I'm not gonna re-explain all of that again though. What I actually wanna walk you through today is what that actually looks like in practice. The actual questions that exposed it for me. And I'll be honest with you, this is a fair warning. These questions, they get uncomfortable. They're going to probably expose some pride. They may expose some selfishness, and they may expose the gap between the man you think you are and the man you've actually been at home. But if I'm being honest with you, that's actually why they work. So I want to walk you through the 4 questions that started changing me. And I'm not giving you these as some expert who's sitting on a mountain. I'm giving you these as a man who had to get honest. Because if I'm being transparent with you, the way I was showing up, it was hurting the person that I loved the most. It was truly hurting her. So with that being said, let's get into the first one. Question number 1 is this. What does she actually need from me right now? Okay? Not what I think she needs. Not what would be the easiest for me to give. Not what I wish the conversation was about. But what does she actually need from me right now? And I know that sounds simple, but for me, that question, it changed a lot. Because a lot of times, I was responding to my wife based on what made sense to me. All right? Not based on what was actually needed in that moment. If she was frustrated, I'm like any other man. I'm going to try to fix it. If she was emotional, I'd try to explain it away. If she brought something up, I'd immediately start thinking about whether I'd agree with it, whether it was fair, or whether I was being misunderstood. Basically, I was still centered on me, my perspective, my intentions, my defense, my logic. And if I'm being honest, that's a problem. Because there are moments in a marriage where your wife, she doesn't need a solution first. Okay? She doesn't need a speech. She doesn't need you to prove your point. She honestly doesn't need you to win the argument. What she needs is presence from you. She needs empathy. She needs to feel like you actually care about what's happening inside of her. And if I'm being honest, I had to learn that the hard way. Sometimes what she needed from me was just to listen. And I'll be honest, that was a struggle. Sometimes she just needed reassurance. Sometimes she needed softness from me. Not leadership mode, Tyrone. Not problem solving mode. Not correction mode. And I think this is where a lot of men miss it. Because honestly, we can be so locked in on being responsible that we stop being relational. We know how to handle tasks. We know how to handle pressure. Like, we're built for pressure. We know how to handle emergencies. But emotional presence, emotional awareness, that takes a different kind of intentionality. So honestly, I had to start asking myself, what does she actually need from me right now? And this wasn't in some type of theory. And this wasn't what I wish she needed. But what does she actually need? And if I'm being honest, sometimes the answer was simple. She needed me to stop talking. She needs me to listen without trying to fix it. She needed me to slow down because I'm like 100, I'm go, go, go. She needed comfort, not correction. She needs me to notice what she's carrying, not just what I'm carrying. And that question, that pulls you out of autopilot. It does. It forces you to stop centering your own experiences. And it made me start paying attention to hers. So let me ask you something honestly. When your wife brings something to you that's hard, what's your first instinct? Is it to understand her? Or is it to defend yourself? I'll be honest, that question matters more than most men realize. Most men don't even think about it. But that question matters a whole lot. All right, question number 2. Now, this one hit me. I'll say this one hit me because it was conflict. All right? Did I really listen? Or was I just waiting to defend myself? This one honestly exposed a lot in me because I realized where so many conversations were happening where I looked like I was listening, but I wasn't actually listening. I was just quiet long enough for her to finish so I could explain why I wasn't wrong. And I'm sure a lot of us are like that. We sit there in silence, acting like we're listening, but as the person is speaking, we're just formulating our response. And I can tell you, those aren't the same things. I think a lot of us as men, we do this without even realizing it. Okay, so for instance, she's talking, and while she's talking, we're building this case in our own head. That's not what happened. That's not what I meant. She's leaving out my side. She doesn't understand the pressure that I'm under. She's honestly being unfair. So now the whole conversation becomes about proving your own innocence instead of understanding her pain. If I'm honest, that was me. Like, that was me for every conversation, every argument, whether I was right or wrong. I was formulating my own response in my head. And I've shared this before, that one of the turning points for me was in a counseling session, sitting there defending myself, explaining myself, trying to make it clear that I, Tyrone Isaac Ware, didn't actually do anything wrong in the technical sense. But while I was defending myself, I wasn't hearing her. I wasn't hearing her pain. I wasn't hearing the insecurity. I wasn't hearing what the situation was doing to her emotionally. I was honestly so focused on being right that I failed in that moment at loving her the way that she needed me to. And that's a hard thing to admit, because sometimes as a man, we think in our own head, our intentions were clean, that the conversation should be over. But that's not how marriage works. Like, honestly, that is not how marriage works. Marriage isn't just about what your intent is. It's also about your impact. And if your wife is hurting, the person you love is hurting, your first job is not to build a defense case. Your first job is to understand what she's experiencing. That doesn't mean you never explain yourself, all right? And that doesn't mean that you don't have your own side. It doesn't mean that you become passive and let everything and anything go. But it means timing matters. Posture matters. Humility, it matters. Because if your first instinct every time there's tension is to defend yourself, you're probably not listening as well as you think you are. So I started asking myself after every hard questions, did I really listen? Or after every hard conversation, did I really listen? Or was I just waiting for my turn to speak? Right? I literally had to program that in my head to listen instead of waiting to speak. All right? Was I trying to understand her, or was I just trying to survive that whole conversation? If I'm being honest, that question, it humbled me, and it should humble you. Because a lot of the times, I had to admit, I heard the words, but I actually didn't hear her. And that's crazy to sit in a whole 30-minute, hour conversation and you hear the words, but you're not hearing the person. You're not hearing the pain. You're not hearing them pour out. Question number 3, and this is probably the one that cuts the deepest for me, if I'm being honest. Did I make her feel loved? Or did I just make her feel managed? I want you to sit with that. Did I make her feel loved or just managed? Because both of those, they're different. They're very different. Totally different things. You can be responsible and still not be loving well. You can be organized and still not be emotionally present. You can handle logistics, right? That's what I do for work. I deal with logistics. So you can handle all logistics. You can keep the lights on, you can pay the bills, you can plan the schedule, you can solve the problems, and still leave your wife feeling like she's unseen. And I had to come face to face with that, because I'm naturally wired to handle things. Like, I am wired to handle things. I'm like that at work. I'm like that in my life with my friends. I'm like that in my personal life, at my church, with my siblings. That's just how I'm built. Typically, men are built that way. All right? If there's a problem, I want to fix it. If something needs to get done, I lock in. If life gets heavy, I go into responsibility mode like that. And in some ways, that's a strength. But if you're not careful, you can start treating your marriage like something to manage instead of a relationship to nurture. You can become efficient without becoming tender. You can literally become responsible without becoming emotionally safe. You can become dependable without becoming deeply connected. And I had to ask myself, when my wife walks away, when she walks away from an interaction with me, does she feel loved? Or does she just feel like I just handled her with kid gloves or something? Did I comfort her? Did I notice her? Did I slow down enough to connect with her? Did I make room for her heart? Or did I just do what needed to be done and move on? If I'm being honest, that question wrecked me a little bit. Because there were times where I thought I'm doing good and I'm showing up because I'm taking care of everything. But when I really looked at it, I was functioning like a leader, like a manager on my job in my marriage. I was keeping the machine moving. I was keeping life afloat. I was taking care of responsibility. But being a husband, it's deeper than just management. Your wife, my wife, she didn't need a well-run household. She needed me to feel like I loved her. She needed to feel like there was love in it. And that means affection and attention. That means patience, curiosity. That means being warm. That means having intentional conversations. That means producing emotional safety. That means not making every interaction transactional. Not making every hard conversation feel like a business meeting. Not acting like because you took care of the practical things, the emotional side, it just takes care of itself. So I had to start asking myself, did I make her feel loved today? Not tolerated, not managed, not supervised, but loved. And if I'm being honest, sometimes the answer was no. Sometimes the answer was I showed up with responsibility, but not tenderness. I was physically there, but emotionally I was somewhere else. I solved the problem, but I actually didn't connect with her. I'll be honest, that question, that will expose whether your wife is experiencing you as a husband or just as a highly stressed project manager. And let me say this clearly, because I know some men need to honestly hear this. Just because you're providing, it does not automatically mean that your wife feels supported from you, because that's what we think. They're not always the same thing. And I'll say this too. If you miss that, you can stay confused for a long time. You can be in a marriage forever and miss that. And your marriage is just going to be confusion. Question number 4 is, how do I put this? Question number 4 is the identity question. Am I showing up as a husband or just as a provider? All right. If you've ever been on this channel and if you've been on this channel for a while, you know this is what matters to me, right? Like, you know this is big to me because I understand provider pressure. You know I get provider pressure. I understand carrying all the bills and all the weight. I understand feeling like if you stop moving, everything's going to fall apart. I understand the weight of trying to build and trying to lead and trying to make sure that the family, and I'm not just saying the people that's in your house, but your whole family is okay. I understand that. But what I had to learn is this: provider is not the full job description. It's a part of it. It definitely matters. It's honorable and it's necessary, but it's not the whole thing. All right, because a provider makes sure that the bills get paid. All right, but a husband makes sure, or they make sure that their wife feels seen. A provider works hard. A husband stays emotionally engaged. A provider carries responsibility, but a husband also carries presence, patience, humility, care, leadership, affection, and intention. And I had to be honest with myself with all of that for a while. I was leaning on provider as proof that I was doing enough. Like if I was working hard, if I was sacrificing, if I was making sure the house was good financially, then that should count for everything. But honestly, it doesn't. It counts and it matters. So I don't want you to think that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't cover the whole assignment. And if I'm honest, sometimes hiding inside of the provider role, it's honestly easier because it gave me something to measure. All right, it's measurable. I can point to the bills. I can point to the hours. I can point to all the stress. I can point to every sacrifice. Like, think about it. What's harder to measure? Emotional presence or provider? Patience, listening, gentleness, intentionality, repair after conflict, actually studying your wife and learning how to love her well. I'll be honest, that stuff is hard. That mess is extremely hard. And because it's harder, it's easy to neglect it if you're not intentional. So I had to start asking myself, am I showing up as a husband right now or just as a provider? Because those are things that they're not the same. They're not. And that question forced me to see how often I was bringing work energy home, but not my husband energy. I was bringing exhaustion home. I was bringing pressure home. I was bringing all my stress home. Like, I was basically a distracted mind at home. But I always wasn't bringing the best side of me home. I wasn't bringing the best part of me home. And that had to change. I want to be real careful here. I'm not saying I started asking these 4 questions and suddenly everything was fixed. That's not real life. That's not how growth works. That's not how healing works. And that's not how your marriage works. I'm still learning. Like, I am still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still catching myself with certain things. But I can tell you that things have changed. And I can tell you what has changed. All right. First, I became more aware. I stopped assuming I was doing better than I actually was. I stopped grading myself off of effort alone. I stopped acting like good intentions automatically meant I was loving well. Second, I became more humble because these questions, they honestly exposed me. They exposed how defensive I could be, how self-centered I could be, how easy it was for me to prioritize being understood over understanding, how easy it was for me to hide inside work pressure and responsibility. Third, I became more intentional. I started slowing down after every conversation. I started praying different, thinking differently on the drive home, and sitting with what happened instead of just moving on. I started asking myself, what did she actually need from me there? Did I really hear her? Did I show love or just control the situation? Was I being a husband or just a provider? And over time, that reflection, it started changing how I showed up. It changed how I showed up in that moment, not just after the fact. All right, that's the goal. The goal isn't just to look bad and feel bad. The goal is to build awareness now, right? That way you can start showing up different the next time. And that's really what this gave me and what it gave me on the inside. It didn't give me perfection, but it gave me awareness. And I'll say this, awareness creates choice, and choice creates change. All right. So if you're a husband and you're watching this, or you know you want to be one someday, here's what I challenge you to do. Don't just watch this video. Don't nod your head and don't just move on. Take these 4 questions and actually sit with them. Write them down. Write them down in your notes app. Put them somewhere where you'll see them. Ask them after the next hard conversation. Ask them after the next week where you know work is basically been consuming you. Ask them when your wife feels distant and you're tempted to just assume everything's fine. Because honestly, becoming a better husband It's not just about loving your wife more in your heart. It's about becoming more honest with yourself and your habits. It's about learning to slow down long enough to actually see how you're showing up. And I want to say this too. This isn't about shame. If you're watching this and you're realizing, man, like I've been passive, I've been defensive, I've been more locked in on work than I've been on my marriage, I've been showing up like a provider more than a husband. I'm not saying that to bury you. I'm not saying that like that at all. I'm saying it because I've lived it. Like I truly have lived it. And if you're willing to get honest about it, you can honestly change also. You can change it. You can become more present. You can become more emotionally aware, more intentional, more trustworthy, more loving. You can become more grounded. You can become the kind of husband that your wife doesn't just depend on financially, but the one that she feels safe with and emotionally too. Now, I'll be honest, that's the real goal. Not just to provide for your family, but to lead them well. To love them well. And honestly, to become the man that you were created to be. So, if this hit home for you, drop husband in the comment. And if one of these 4 questions hit you especially hard, I want you to drop the number 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right? I genuinely want to know which one landed with you the most. And if you haven't watched the previous video yet, where I talked about being a high performer at work, but a low performer in my marriage, I want you to go watch that video next. Because that video, it really builds on that one. Like that's where it all starts to build. All right? And if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I truly appreciate y'all. With that being said, later.